people to join. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. I'm Dave Vandenberg, Chair of NAFA's Transaction Integrity Working Group. We work to educate members about the risk of fraud, which can occur at any stage of a transaction. Please feel free to reach out anytime to ask questions, report fraud issues, or suggest topics for discussion for future webinars to fraud@nafa.aero. I'm pleased to present today's webinar, Tips for Conducting Due Diligence in Aircraft Transactions. I want to take a moment to thank the sponsors of today's webinar, TVPX and Insured Aircraft Title Service. TVPX is a leader in the global marketplace, providing a range of services with the highest levels of customer service for more than 20 years. TVPX is a licensed U.S. customs broker specializing in the import and export of business and commercial aircraft through U.S. Customs and Border Protection. TVPX also provides registration, trust, and tax services related to business aviation. Insured Aircraft Title Service is the largest title and escrow company worldwide with more than 60 years in operation. IATS has provided aviation firms and financial institutions with professional expertise needed to make sound business decisions. They provide support with escrow services, document prep and filing, title and lien clearing, special registration numbers, the international registry, title search, and has a comprehensive Know Your Customer and anti-money laundering program. Now I'll turn today's seminar over to our moderator, Greg Luster, to start the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you to everyone who's joining us today, including Joan Roberts from IATS and Lacey Perna from TVPX. I also want to thank NAFA for putting these webinars together on due diligence. We're here today to talk about tips for conducting due diligence and how to begin a due diligence program if you don't have one. Joan and Lacey, as we discussed in our calls preparing for this webinar, we all agreed that due diligence is an essential part of an aircraft transaction, and each party needs to be doing it. Lacey, if I don't currently collect due diligence information on my aircraft deals, but it's time I started, what questions should I ask and how should I ask them?
Thanks, Greg. So this is a really good question, a starting question for the group today. So as we discussed in the last two webinars, two major things: comply with the law and consider any other risks associated with not doing due diligence. By the way, the other two webinars and this one are and will be available for you to watch for everybody to watch through the NAFA website. Our goal as an industry is to avoid risk. And the goal here is to not do business with bad people and avoid doing business in bad places. Due diligence and conversations around due diligence can feel overwhelming. We all start somewhere. So this is a very general overview to be used as a tool or a guide to get you started. Where do we start? How do you get your arms around what kind of risks you're protecting yourself from? So we all have reputational risk. We're an industry under scrutiny. We, TVPX and Insured Aircraft, we don't want you to rely on us just because you know that we're doing due diligence. This matter is all of our responsibility. Please do understand that even though we're all looking at our customer company, its ultimate beneficial owners, UBO, and airplane information, we're all obtaining different information about a transaction. Insured Aircraft, TVPX, we're both looking at every transaction at a different angle, right? So a UBO, what is an ultimate beneficial owner? So recently the definition has changed due to the Corporate Transparency Act. Generally speaking, a UBO is an individual or individuals who directly or indirectly exercise substantial control over a company. So when you're designing your questionnaires, You may want to get familiar with the Corporate Transparency Act, because the U.S. government has provided guidance on what you need to know about your customers. Also, you'll want to know about any entities or companies that have a significant ownership of your customer, as some companies are set up for the sole purpose of owning the aircraft. So there is a business behind the entity. A good place to start with all of this is to use a due diligence form or a questionnaire. Have it signed and dated. Also, make sure it's complete. Please remember that it's rare for your form to be returned 100% complete the first time. So you can ping back your customer, get what you need, and it's also a good time to ask additional questions, if necessary. So there are some examples of different KYC questionnaires on the internet. Nothing wrong with starting there. But remember that your questions should also be designed for your company's business service. Yes, we have common questions that most parties are asking in an aircraft transaction. Who are the parties involved? Buyers, sellers. So business type would be another good question. Where's the money to purchase the aircraft coming from? Referral sources are always, good to know. So there are questions that are tailored for particular parties. So a bank is going to ask about credit issues. Escrow agents, they want to know where the money is coming from. They want to know where it's going. Here at TVPX, we're looking for customer information, aircraft information, but we're also, as the owner trustee, we're also interested in the operations of the aircraft. So the locations and the parties that have control over the operations of the aircraft. The bottom line is that there are many parties involved asking all different questions. So we're all needing to do our part to put all these different puzzle pieces together. A key point, somebody dropping out of a transaction, they might not be able, or they're not going to be able to share, information on why or the reason, but that's a strong indication that there's an issue and you'll want to research further. We're all here to work together. I do want to mention, so there's been some questions about a universal form. So I heard this a few weeks ago in our last webinar, and it's been brought up in conversation, before as well. From what I've seen across the industry is that all of us have an individualized form for a particular business type. If a customer comes to TVPX and says, well, I've already completed a form for insured aircraft, we'll definitely take what the customer has completed for insured aircraft, or from whomever, right? We will pre-populate our form with the information that's already been provided to the other company, and send it back to our client, asking them to fill out any blanks that are in there. So none of us want our customers to do more work than necessary, but we are all looking at the transaction a little bit differently. So these are just some practical tips for getting started. Everybody has to start somewhere. It's kind of like how to get things going. It will evolve over time. I promise you that. And our world is constantly changing, and knowing your customer is a huge topic.
And Lacey, just to be clear, and Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as sharing information goes, I've had people say to me before, well, can you just send the information I gave to you to TVPX or some other party? And I don't believe that we can share the information that is given to us. Now we can say to them, that same form you filled out to us, you can send to TVPX. Greg, am I correct? Is that we should not be sharing information without that the information needs to come directly from the parties?
Definitely. I would say that when you receive a KYC worksheet, you would like it to come directly from the party who filled it out.
Yeah, agreed on that.
Yeah. And Lacey, you mentioned the Corporate Transparency Act. I think it's important to note that it's new and just being implemented. And I would encourage everyone to, either look at the act itself or to talk to their lawyers to find out exactly what their filing requirements are. Joan, once I've collected the due diligence information, how do I organize my process for identifying possible risks?
Well, as Lacey stated, each of us are in for a different reason and we have different requirements. But the first thing you want to know is what legal requirements do you have to do due diligence? I think it's really important to note that everyone is required to do due diligence. It is a legal requirement. And if you are subpoenaed, if you receive a subpoena on your transaction from one of the government agencies, you're going to have to prove to them in writing that you have done your due diligence. So I think that's really important to note. You cannot rely on the fact that Insured Aircraft did due diligence, TVPX did due diligence, the lender did due diligence, but you are all responsible for doing your own due diligence on everybody involved in your transaction. There are sanctions, and you can go to the OFAC website, which is the Office of Foreign Asset Control, and look up the sanctions. There are individuals that are sanctioned. There are whole countries that are sanctioned. There are airplanes that are sanctioned from doing business with. So this is a very important tool, and you need to know what sanctions you're dealing with. Mostly, sanctions are in the EU and the UK, but it doesn't necessarily mean if you're doing a domestic transaction with a domestic corporation that there aren't foreigners involved in your domestic corporation that could possibly be sanctioned. Again, whole airplanes are sanctioned. So it's really important that you put that on your checklist of things that need to be looked at very carefully. Distinguish, is it a typical transaction for you? Is it atypical because you have a foreign purchaser and you're used to mostly doing domestic transactions? But I think in today's day and age, there are all sorts of, opportunities for international buyers and sellers. And even, brokers, you may have a foreign broker that you'll be wiring money to that you'll have to do due diligence on. So again, I always tell everybody right in the beginning, we need due diligence on buyer, seller, any person or entity sending in or receiving funds in our transaction. Consider your jurisdictions you're doing transactions with. Some jurisdictions are known for drug trafficking, money laundering. Put them on your high risk list. Types of businesses that may indicate increased risk. Again, some countries have blocking sanctions against doing any business at all. Especially, right now we have Russia. So that's something that you want to really take a close look at if you're doing an aircraft that has been based in Russia or with a Russian entity or funds to be wired to Russia. So again, put that on your high risk list. And again, is this legally required of you or is this a reputational risk? For us at IATS, obviously we're in the escrow business and our banking relationships are very important to us. We do not want to do business with anybody or anything that would jeopardize our banking relationships. So reputational risk is really important to us as well.
Joan, you mentioned the OFAC website. I'd like to tell people you can sign up for their newsletter, and new sanctions are released, every few days or twice a week. So it's a way to keep apprised of what new sanctions are and what new laws have hit the books.
Great. And Greg, would you explain to us? I know there's different requirements for the UBOs, ultimate beneficial owners, as Lacey discussed. I think in the US, it's 25% ownership you need to obtain, and in the UK, it's 10%. Is that correct?
That's correct. The threshold of ownership in the United States is 25%, and in Europe and in Great Britain, the standard's 10%. So, it's some people, if you're doing an international transaction and they're only used, and they're not used to providing the 10%, it's something you have to educate them on.
Great. And, I also want to point out that some foreign countries use sanctions to politically punish their rivals, etc. So again, consider the source when you are doing your due diligence.
Yeah. And, I just want to add that, if you're working with a company, or an individual, in one of these, high risk countries, or, that a country might be prone to, problems, keep in mind that the customer might not be doing anything, wrong. But you'll want to ask some additional questions to feel comfortable to move forward with the transaction.
Absolutely.
And one more thing is, don't forget any searches that don't forget to save your searches to your customer file. So to have that trail is extremely important.
Yeah, and on the last webinar, Jonathan Epstein said, and he's right, that if you don't have documentation, then the government's view is you did not conduct due diligence. So Lacey, your point is very good, that you have to keep that information. So Lacey, what are the different sources and search tools that are useful for aircraft due diligence?
Yeah, so, we don't want to promote one company, over another today. But we do have a list, not in any particular order, that we can share after this webinar for companies to get started. But there's many different.
Lacey, I don't mean to interrupt, but I believe that Tracy is going to include that list with her summary that she does of the webinar.
Perfect.
So I sent it to her this morning and asked her to do that for us.
Thank you. So there's many different things to get, a company started. There are search tools that check the government, the OFAC list that we were just talking about. It's a great starting point. Keep in mind though, that's only one watch list. There are many, many worldwide. Don't underestimate the value of an internet search. So it's free too. The FAA website's a good tool. So I look at FlightAware just to see where an aircraft is or has been over the last week or two. You can compare closing locations to your questionnaire to make sure the information is consistent. And you might even, be concerned about closing location for sales tax purposes. Here at TVPX too, we'll use LinkedIn to find employment history to determine if an individual is associated with an entity or not. So there are some easy online systems, and there are others that require training, require getting your IT department involved, like online platforms. They'll be doing, more comprehensive searches. So in determining all this, consider your budget. Also, consider the amount of transactions or searches that you might be expecting over a certain period of time. So what's the amount of investment that will provide you with the tool that will help you sleep at night? So there are programs or products that are very reasonably priced that cover a variety of different watch lists and even media articles. So if you're concerned about how much it's going to cost, which is a big factor in deciding what is right for you, look around. Years ago, we started, I think, searching the web, different companies that handle due diligence. I think we ended up narrowing it down to like 3 companies and working from there. Any one of these things is better than doing nothing.
Oh, I agree. And I think it's important when you're using the commercially available search sites, you need to pay attention to how often they update their information, because you can run a search and it hasn't been updated in 5 years. And I know one of them, you can request updates so you can get a more, a date that's closer to the transaction for your search. Joan, what do I do if the due diligence information or the search results are inconclusive or indicate there are possible risks?
Well, again, you just need to go over the information that you've gathered with your management team and make a decision if there are risks that you're willing to take or not willing to take. For instance, is it a Russian oligarch? Is it a human rights violator? And then oftentimes will require utility bills to prove residency. That is, if we find so many, or often we use the same utility bills or passports, if we find so many people with the same name, and we have to find their birth date to find out if they are the person that is it, in question in our searches and things like that. We work a lot with sanctions attorneys to help us make decisions on some of the international, especially Russian deals right now. And they're very helpful, and we enjoy working with them. And don't be afraid to say no to a transaction. If you are, having more red flags thrown up than you're getting questions for, or there is something that you don't like, don't be afraid to say no and walk away. It is difficult to do, to turn down business, but I would rather turn down business than end up in jail.
Yeah,
or jeopardizing our banking relationship or something like that.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that, Shelley made a good point last week or a few weeks ago in the last webinar, and I think it's can't say it enough, is don't just check a box to move forward. Be diligent. It's okay to question more, even if it's the heat of the moment. I mean, we've all been there at the 11th hour, but it's okay to raise your hand to feel comfortable to move forward.
It is. And, when you're asking questions and you're not getting answers, there's a reason for that. If you have nothing to hide, you're going to be able to give us the information, we asked for with no qualms about it. But when you keep asking the questions over and over and you're not getting answers, more than likely there's a reason, and that should throw up a red flag for you right away. So trust your gut. I know it was said in the last webinar, trust your gut feeling. If something doesn't feel right, it's okay to walk away.
Exactly. Lacey, if my information and searches come back clean, am I done?
So good question. So we get all our information, everything comes back clean. Now for, a lot of our transactions, we wait for closing. Doesn't all happen in the same day. So during this time, we should be monitoring communications. This is until the time that the transaction actually closes. Look for last minute signs of changes of parties and reevaluate, risk based on these changes. Consider, time lags, consider doing updated searches just before the closing.
I'm sure everybody's heard the news that Scotty Scheffler got arrested this morning on his way to the PGA. And, we always update our searches as well. And, if we were closing a claim for Scotty Scheffler today, all of a sudden, it seems like he's going to be charged with a felony. So, and it wouldn't necessarily prevent us from doing an aircraft deal with him, but it just goes to show you that things can change so rapidly, and everybody needs to be aware of that and keep up your searches. I know here at IATS, we don't, just when we have a repeat customer, we don't just say, well, repeat customer, they're good, because we're used to doing business with them all the time. But we update our search, even though we have their information on file. We do a current search to make sure nothing has changed. So
Very good. Lacey, once the deal closes, am I done?
So maybe you can close out your file, but not if you have a continuing relationship. So like us, TVPX as owner trustee. So if you do have an ongoing, relationship with a customer, consider the frequency that you want to request your updated KYC information. Don't forget to, as Joan just mentioned, the reoccurring customer. So customer comes back with a new transaction. Not every detail about your next transaction will be the same as what you currently have in your file. So we talked about a questionnaire a little while ago. For these circumstances, consider a slimmed down, like a version of your questionnaire, like an addendum. Getting the transaction details. Again, we don't want our customers to complete the same form multiple times, but to create, unnecessary, work. But it might be long enough of a time lag where you want to ask your customer to review and comment what you currently have in your file. So, a simple no changes on the customer KYC form is sufficient. That can be in an email. Remember, save it to the file. Again, we can't stress that enough. Save the emails, the updated forms. If something changes, get the updated information and do the additional searches. Also, with an ongoing relationship, think about your annual process and consider adding the KYC step there. For instance, are you billing? Are you a party to an insurance certificate where those do expire after a certain amount of time? You could add the latest KYC form into that, reach out communication to the customer, and simply ask them to review and comment, changes or no changes. This part doesn't need to be fancy. It's a touch with your customer, a review of what you currently have. Once you hear back, do another search, and you can move forward.
Very good. I just want to let you both know we're getting some really good questions in the comments, and we're going to address those once we're done with what we're doing now.
okay, great.
Joan, what is ongoing screening and why is it important?
Well, just like I gave the Scotty Scheffler example just now, things change daily, and companies, airplanes are added to the sanctions list, countries. So that's why it is important to keep your screening up to date and not just rest on the information that you've previously acquired. Things change all the time.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that, we talked a little bit about programs, but there are programs out there that have the ongoing screening function. This allows for a daily search of the companies or the contacts, individuals that you have selected. And it's a daily search. It's like a daily scrub down. It's normally used for any of us that do have an ongoing relationship with the customer. It's close to impossible to do a search every single day. So sometimes the automation of this can be helpful.
Definitely. And just to add, I think it's important to be consistent on when you ask for updated information. It's good to have a policy. Are you going to ask for it every 6 months, a year? And just have a policy and stick to it. And I think that's a good piece of advice. Joan, I apologize. I'm on the wrong question. Lacey and Joan, do you have any scenarios or real world examples you would like to share?
I know we just within the last couple of weeks here, we're working on a transaction, and our escrow agent had been asking for the due diligence information and not getting the answers that she was expecting to get. Her gut was already telling her something's wrong. The more we asked, then the deal started changing, and we were told, well, you're going to get a new contract tomorrow, and it's going to take out this company, and we're like, what is going on? And we had kind of circled the wagons that night and decided we were more than likely going to withdraw from the deal. And overnight, we were copied on an email, and there was a bad actor copied on the email as well. And we knew then that, like we said, our gut instinct was telling us something wasn't right, and we withdrew from the transaction. So, again, don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to walk away. Two, we had a deal just like, again, the Scotty Scheffler, scenario I gave you, where we did our last minute search, and this particular entity had been sanctioned since we had done our original search. So, you just can't be too careful.
Yeah.
Lacey, what about you?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, look for clues. So at TVPX, we get our CIP form, everything's complete, it's come back clean. Now we get close to our closing, we get our insurance certificate. Now it's listing a party that we haven't heard of through the whole, transaction. We go back to the customer and ask what involvement this party has, with the aircraft. We do a search. If it's not an error in the insurance certificate, ask for more information on the entity. Again, it's okay to ask multiple questions, get comfortable, especially if something doesn't make sense.
And I know here for us, we'll be rocking along. We'll have all of our due diligence done on all the parties, and all of a sudden the money will show up for the purchase price from a totally uninvolved party that we're aware of, that we had not done any due diligence on before. Of course, everybody's in a hurry. They want to close, but we're just like, nope, sorry. We're going to need this form completed. We're going to have to get our compliance department to do the search, and you're just going to have to wait until we're done.
Yeah.
Very good. I think, like I said, we have some pretty good questions, so I'm going to go to those now in the comments. The first is, can you please clarify, where does the 10% requirement for UBO in Europe come from? Is it related to any European regulation? I would say that I'm not aware of the exact regulation, but in dealing with our outside sanctions counsel, we're aware, and they told us that, if you're doing a deal in Europe, 10% is what the rule is. If you're interested, like I said, there's many sanctions attorneys that practice in this area daily, and they can give you this information. We use them all the time. So here's one. Joan and Lacey, do you rely 100% on the information you receive from your customers via the form they sign, or do you ask for their corporate documents?
So I'll start, I guess, Joan.
Go ahead.
As part of TVPX's KYC, we do ask for corporate documents, whether it's U.S., or foreign. We ask for, something similar to like a formation document. It just helps tie the two together.
And we're the same at IATS. Plus we do some independent searches and already have some information usually about these companies that, again, so we are not relying 100% on what they're telling us, because your information is only as good as what they give you. And you have a responsibility to do some outside searching as well to find out if it's what the information they've given you is accurate.
And we usually compare to the information they give us with the LLC statement filed in the registry. And, we're shocked all the time when they don't match. And it's normally someone has made a change, but it's good to compare that information to other information you've received, just to see if there's any more questions you could have. And here's our last question. If you know a customer is based in Europe but is setting up a U.S. LLC, does the jurisdiction of the entity or the customer apply for the percentage rule? I think this question is getting really close to specific legal advice. I would say generally you're subject to the sanctions given by the country that you work in. But to really get an answer to this question, again, I would recommend speaking to a sanctions attorney who, like I said, they're the ones I've dealt with are more than happy to to provide this kind of information. And when you have short conversations, it's not that expensive. But for these specific questions, I think I'd have to refer you to an attorney.
But I'd like to say too that a foreign entity or individual setting up a U.S. LLC, the U.S. LLC is still got the 75% voting interest, and 2/3 or more of the board of directors must be U.S. citizens. So they can't just get around that rule by setting up a U.S. LLC.
Correct.
I was just going to mention that while we're waiting on if we have any more questions, there was just one question that I think we missed at the end that we can talk about for a few minutes.
Do you see the question that
I do, and I can actually it's I can give it to Joan if you'd like.
Sure.
And so it's Joan, how do I make sure I'm keeping up on the latest practices for performing aircraft related due diligence?
Well, I know here at IATS, we get our management team and we go work with our lawyers, both inside and outside counsel, to make sure that our practices are up to date, that we don't need to make any changes, that there haven't been any new requirements put out, like especially now with the new Corporate Transparency Act and everything, so that we know that the process that we're using is what we need to be using at the current time. And we want to stay up to date on that for sure. Again, and we just periodically review from time to time with our outside counsel and inside counsel to make sure we're doing everything we need to do. Also, don't be afraid to ask some of the professional associations that you work with and all those folks that you network with, what are they doing to keep up with their practices, or what are they seeing, any changes that need to be made that you're aware of. So I think that's a very valuable tool as well.
Definitely. So Lacey, we have another question. It says lots of aircraft being purchased through a U.S. trust, then moving on to Brazil. Specific recommendations on vetting the full chain.
Yeah, so we do see this all the time. Thank you, Brittany. When we sell an airplane out of trust, part of our process is to ask our customer if they're reselling. Sometimes they're reselling and they don't know to who yet. Other times, they know it's passed through. But we do ask the question. And there's been a lot of talk about pass through closings. So it's asking for the chain of title as much as possible, and then doing searches on any parties that are provided to you.
All right, we have another question. Joan, if you're working only as the escrow agent and not filing any of the documentation, do you still do KYC due diligence on your end?
Absolutely, especially if we're handling the funds, 100%, because that is the most important part, is handling the funds. And you need to know who is involved, and is somebody sending funds in on behalf of a bad actor. So absolutely.
Yeah, and even if it's just a documents only closing where we're not handling the funds, you're still subject to sanctions, because usually they say you can't provide goods or services to specific entities. So in my view, a docs only closing would be providing services. So you still need to check your parties. We still check our parties even if there are no funds.
Correct.
I am just looking to see if there are any other questions. And as of right now, I don't see anything. So I think it's time to wrap up. Thank you, Joan and Lacey, for an excellent conversation. And thank you again to TVPX and IATS for sponsoring this webinar. NAFA's next due diligence and transactional integrity webinar is coming up on June 5th at noon Central Time, and will focus on navigating Russian sanctions. Due diligence is everyone's job, and these webinars will benefit everyone on your team who's part of the due diligence process. Make sure you mark your calendar for the next one and invite everyone from your team who you think can benefit from this series. And don't forget, you can always reach out to Dave and the Transactional Integrity Working Group anytime at the email address fraud@nafa.aero. To check out recordings of past webinars, you can visit NAFA's website at nafa.aero. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.